In the quiet, sunlit classroom of Gidangwari Primary School, Hadiza stood at the front, pointing to words on the chalkboard. Her voice rang out, clear and warm, as she taught the children the basics of English. Her pupils, seated on rough benches with eager faces and bright eyes, hung on to every word, repeating after her. "Can you say good morning?" she prompted, beaming at the small faces staring up at her. "Good morning, Auntie Hadiza," they chorused, giggling as they said it together. Hadiza's heart swelled. Teaching wasn't just a job to her, it was her passion. She loved these children, most of them coming from families as humble as her own. They treated her with respect, as though she were more than a simple village teacher, and she made sure each of them felt valued. As the day's lesson ended, the children packed up, lingering to wave goodbye, until finally she was alone in the empty classroom. She brushed chalk dust from her hands and gathered her things, glancing around the room one last time. She felt a surge of pride, a sense of purpose. No matter how small her contributions seemed, she knew she was making a difference. Back at home, Hadiza's life was equally simple, filled with quiet routines and love for her family. Their small home, a modest 2-room mud house with a zinc roof, was a testament to their humble life. Every evening, she opened a small vegetable kiosk in front of their house, where she sold fresh greens, peppers, and tomatoes to make a little extra money. When her husband, Bobby, returned from his day as an Okada rider, he'd help her pack up, and they'd eat dinner together with their little daughter, Fatima. They didn't have much, but Hadiza knew how to stretch the little they had. They lived with a quiet kind of resilience, and Fatima seemed happy and content, her laughter filling the house each night. Hadiza treasured those small moments, thinking of them as the kind of simple joy many might overlook. But then, little by little, things began to change. It started one evening when Bobby came home a bit later than usual. In his hand, he held a glossy bag, a strange sight in their modest home. When he handed it to Hadiza, she felt the weight of it with a mixture of surprise and confusion. "Open it," he said, a glint of pride in his eyes. Inside was a fancy, glittering wristwatch. She turned it over in her hands, speechless. They could barely manage their day-to-day expenses. She hadn't dared dream of such luxuries. "Bobby, where did you get this?" He shrugged casually. "A little something from the city. I've been picking up extra trips." Hadiza wanted to believe him. She wanted to see it as a gift of love, not one that would bring questions. She accepted it with a quiet smile and kissed his cheek, pushing aside her curiosity. But as the days passed, more gifts came. One day it was a sleek new handbag. The next, shiny shoes for Fatima. Her heart swelled with appreciation, yet a worry lingered. These were things that didn't fit the life they'd built, the life she had come to treasure. Whispers started swirling among neighbors. Amina, her closest friend, grew concerned, watching as Bobby's absences grew longer and his returns were accompanied by even more luxuries. "Hadiza," Amina said softly one evening as they shared tea outside her house. "Have you asked Bobby where he's getting all this? People are talking." Hadiza shook her head, pressing her lips together. "He says he's just picking up extra trips in the city." Amina's gaze remained worried, and she reached over to hold Hadiza's hand. "Be careful, my friend. Not all that glitters is gold." That night, as she lay beside Bobby in bed, Hadiza couldn't quiet the questions running through her mind. He had never been a man of mystery, and now she felt a gap growing between them, something dark and heavy that she couldn't quite name. Finally, the fear grew too great to ignore. She needed to know the truth. The following week, she packed a small bag and told Bobby she was going to visit her parents in another village. She planned to return secretly after a day and follow him to discover where he went in the city, hoping to prove herself wrong. But fate had other plans. The van she traveled in broke down, and as night settled over the lonely road, her world would change in ways she never expected. The night was thick with silence as the stranded passengers huddled by the roadside, their murmurs filling the air. The van's engine had given out in the middle of nowhere, leaving them isolated under the wide, star-studded sky. Hadiza wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders, her mind racing with thoughts of her husband. Her decision to follow him into the city gnawed at her. A part of her felt like a traitor, but another part felt betrayed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crunching of leaves in the distance. Shadows began to emerge from the dark forest surrounding them. moving with an eerie confidence. Fear rose in her throat as she clutched her bag, pressing herself against the van as the strangers drew closer. They were a group of men, armed and masked. The leader's voice cut through the darkness, a voice that made Hadiza's heart stop. "Stay where you are. Don't make a move," he barked, waving his gun. It was a voice she knew too well. Bobby's voice. Her vision blurred with shock, her legs turning to jelly as her husband stepped into the moonlight, unrecognizable in his menacing attire. But she knew it was him, the shape of his face, the way he stood, even the slight rasp in his voice. Her stomach twisted as the terrible realization sank in. The luxuries, the absences, it was all funded by this. Her husband was an armed robber. Hadiza was frozen in place, unable to believe that the man she loved, the father of her child, could be involved in such a dark world. But Bobby's expression changed the moment he spotted her among the terrified passengers. His eyes widened, then quickly narrowed as he realized what this meant. He raised his gun slightly, his hand trembling. "What? Hadiza," he whispered, his voice barely audible to her over the pounding of her heart. "Bobby," she murmured, the name heavy with pain and betrayal. "How could you?" But there was no time for answers. Bobby looked around at his fellow robbers, the panic creeping into his eyes as he realized that his secret, his double life, was now unraveling in front of his wife. Desperation flickered across his face, and in that instant, Hadiza saw him make a choice. He leveled his gun, and before she could react, the shot echoed in the still night. When she opened her eyes, her vision swam in and out of focus. She could feel her body being lifted, the rough hands of strangers carrying her as the darkness around her gave way to white hospital walls. Pain radiated through her side, but all she could think about was Fatima. Her little girl at home in the village, unaware of the monster her father had become. Tears in her eyes as she thought of the years before the secrets and the shadows, before betrayal lurked between them. Bobby and Hadiza were simply two young hearts brimming with love and hope. Their paths first crossed at a local festival in Gidangwari, a celebration filled with music, laughter, and the delicious aroma of roasted corn filling the air. Hadiza was just out of secondary school with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her friends often teased her, saying she was too serious and studious, but she was proud of her ambitions. Shed watched her parents scrape and struggle to send her to school, and she wanted to repay their sacrifice. That night, she had joined her friends reluctantly, intending only to stay for a short while. Bobby, on the other hand, was a different spirit entirely. He was lively, a little mischievous, with a playful grin that could disarm anyone. His job as an Okada rider gave him a certain charm and freedom that attracted the young women of the village. Bobby's laughter was loud and infectious, and he had a way of drawing people to him with a single glance. When Bobby spotted Hadiza at the festival, he couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't like the other girls who laughed and danced freely. She stood off to the side, watching with a shy smile. Her delicate beauty shone, her eyes bright with curiosity, and she held herself with a quiet grace that stirred something inside him. As the evening wore on, he worked up the nerve to approach her. With his signature grin, he offered her a roasted corn, bowing in a playful gesture. "Will the most beautiful lady here honor me by accepting this?" His voice light but sincere. Hadiza, surprised by his boldness, looked at him with wide eyes, a blush creeping up her cheeks. She wanted to refuse, to keep up her proper image, but something in Bobby's easy confidence made her laugh. She took the corn, shaking her head with a small smile. "Thank you." "You know, flattery doesn't work on me," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Bobby's eyes sparkled. "It's not flattery, Hadiza, just honesty." They talked long into the night, walking around the festival grounds, sharing stories of their lives. Bobby was captivated by her dreams of teaching, her dedication, and the love she held for her family. She was different from anyone had ever met, and he found himself drawn to her grounded nature and gentle spirit. Meanwhile, Hadiza felt a warmth she hadn't known before. Bobby's laughter, his easygoing charm, and the way he looked at her made her feel special. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship blossomed. Bobby would wait outside her home each morning to walk her to the village market, where she sold vegetables to help her family. He'd carry her baskets, insisting that someone with dreams as big as hers shouldn't have to lift anything heavy. "I'll support you. Hadiza had say earnestly as they strolled through the market stalls. I want to see you teach someday, standing in front of a classroom full of students. Hadiza's heart warmed every time he spoke of their future together. In Bobby, she found a man who believed in her dreams as much as she did. And in her, Bobby found someone who saw him for more than just an Okada rider. She saw his heart, his kindness, and his potential. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Bobby took Hadiza to a secluded spot near the riverbank. The gentle murmur of the water and the distant calls of evening birds created a magical setting. Hadiza, he said, taking her hands in his, I may not be a rich man, but I promise to love you with all I have. I want to build a life with you, no matter how simple it may be. Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded, her heart swelling with love. I don't need riches, Bobby. I just need you. They married soon after in a small ceremony filled with family, friends, and laughter. They moved into a tiny, cozy home, and though their lives were simple, they were happy. Bobby worked hard as an Okada rider, and Hadiza began teaching at the village school. They shared dreams, laughter, and hopes for a future together, unaware of the path that lay ahead. Their love was strong, and for years it was enough. But sometimes, even the purest love can be overshadowed by secrets. Hadiza never imagined that her husband, the man she loved so fiercely, could betray her so deeply. And as she lay in her hospital bed, the memories of those early days haunted her, making the pain of his betrayal all the more unbearable. Her love had been real, her dreams for their family genuine, and now all of it felt tainted, leaving her with nothing but fragments of a life she once cherished. But as she remembered that promise she made to Bobby by the riverbank, she knew she could still hold on to one part of it, for her daughter, for Fatima. A young police officer stood by her bed, his expression a mix of pity and anger. Madam Hadiza, you're very lucky. Someone found you unconscious and called the police. We were able to bring you here in time. Hadiza swallowed hard, her throat dry. My husband, she rasped. He's a robber. He tried to kill me. The officer's face grew stern and he motioned to a doctor in the hall. Well, take care of this, ma'am. You just focus on recovering. But Hadiza couldn't focus on anything but the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest. She had loved Bobby deeply, trusted him with every part of her life. Now she was alone, her heart splintered, her trust shattered. Yet even through the pain, one thought strengthened her resolve: Fatima. She had to survive, if only to protect her daughter. A few days later, the police arranged to escort her back to her home in Gidangwari. As they drove through the village, whispers trailed behind them. Neighbors peeked from behind windows, the news of her survival spreading like wildfire. Hadiza walked to her door, every step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, Fatima rushed to her, wrapping her tiny arms around her mother's waist. Mama, I missed you. Did you bring me anything from Grandma's? She asked, her innocent face lighting up with joy. Hadiza choked back her tears, hugging her daughter tightly. Yes, my dear, I brought you something even better. Mama is here to stay, and I will never leave you. She looked over Fatima's head at the officers, who nodded solemnly. It was time. They knocked on the door, and when Bobby opened it, his face drained of color. For a moment, he looked like a man facing his own worst nightmare. He tried to step back, but the officers grabbed him by the arms. Bobby Issa, one of them announced, you are under arrest for armed robbery and attempted murder. Hadiza watched as he struggled, disbelief and fury flashing in his eyes. His gaze landed on her, filled with a mixture of shock and betrayal. How are you? He stammered. I survived, she whispered, her voice steady, though her heart ached. And for Fatima, I'll keep surviving. You have no place in our lives anymore, Bobby. As they dragged him away, his shouts grew fainter. She clutched Fatima close, her little girl's warmth grounding her in this painful reality. The days ahead would not be easy, but she had a new purpose now, to rebuild their life, to create a world where her daughter could grow up safe and loved, free from the shadows of deceit. Hadiza closed the door, shutting out the darkness of her past. She was ready to start anew, for herself and for Fatima, with the quiet resilience that had always been her strength.